The hills above the Pacific are quieter now. The terraces remain immaculate. The pools still hold their polished reflections. Tour buses continue their steady climb toward the hilltop complex known as Hearst Castle. From a distance, nothing appears diminished, and yet the empire that once sustained it no longer exists. What stands today is a monument without its machinery, a palace severed from the publishing fortune, political leverage, and private network of influence that created it. The marble colonnades endure, but the invisible system that financed their maintenance, replenished their collections, and justified their extravagance has been hollowed out by time, litigation, taxation, and institutional transformation. Hearst Castle was never simply a house, it was a mechanism, a projection of wealth so immense it required its own preservation infrastructure. Curators, ranchers, art brokers, architects, accountants, all orbiting a single hilltop vision. It was sustained by a media empire that shaped national opinion and for decades operated as a parallel court of American power. Now the castle survives as a state-managed relic, carefully stabilized, its excess curated for public consumption. The question is no longer how it was built. The question is how an empire large enough to build it became too fragile to keep it whole.
Chapter 1. The Hill Without Its Empire. Morning arrives quietly over the Santa Lucia Range. The fog lifts in deliberate layers, revealing the towers and terraces of Hearst Castle as if they were being staged for an audience that has not yet gathered. The Pacific remains distant and metallic in tone. The stone glows faintly, untouched by urgency. At ground level, the gates open on schedule. The estate is now administered by the California Department of Parks and Recreation. Uniformed staff conduct inspections before visitors arrive. Moisture levels are measured. Marble is monitored for hairline fractures. Climate systems hum behind walls that were never designed for public circulation. Insurance requirements and conservation protocols shape each decision. The hill operates according to procedure. Nothing appears broken. The pools remain filled. The Neptune pool, drained and restored at great expense only recently, now holds its surface in disciplined stillness. Guest houses stand in careful alignment. The Casa Grande rises at the center, symmetrical and composed. Tour groups move through designated routes, guided by docents who have memorized the choreography of space. What has vanished is less visible. The estate no longer answers to a single will. It does not host private councils. It does not adapt itself to the preferences of a proprietor who can alter a facade or acquire a 16th century ceiling at impulse. The castle functions, but it does not decide. Once, the hill was an instrument of power. Today, it is a preserved artifact. This transformation did not occur through fire or neglect. It unfolded through paperwork, taxation, negotiated agreements, and the slow recognition that the institution capable of sustaining such a place had weakened. The physical complex remains vast, but the machinery that financed its appetite, printing presses, advertising revenues, political leverage, has been separated from it. Visitors ascend the road in state-operated buses. They disembark beneath carved archways once reserved for invited guests. Their tickets are scanned, their movement is timed, their access is structured. The estate survives within a public mandate: education, preservation, accessibility. Its logic has changed. Under private ownership, excess required no justification beyond ambition. Now, every restoration requires funding approvals. Every conservation effort must be documented, audited, defended. The hill is subject to legislative cycles and budget constraints. Wildfire mitigation plans dictate landscaping choices. Seismic retrofitting shapes interior interventions. The estate has been stabilized, not animated. The original ranch lands that once stretched across hundreds of thousands of acres have largely been subdivided or repurposed. Cattle operations no longer function as the estate's agricultural backbone. The zoo that once housed exotic animals has disappeared into memory and faint architectural traces. The system that once fed the hill, financially, logistically, symbolically, has thinned. What remains is architecture without its empire. Yet the illusion of continuity persists. The towers still puncture the sky. The imported art remains positioned with curatorial precision. Visitors photograph colonnades and ceilings that were assembled from fragments of European history. The estate appears intact, but intact is not sovereign. The state maintains what private capital once expanded. The difference is not aesthetic, it is structural. Decisions now originate in Sacramento offices rather than in a publishing magnate's Manhattan headquarters. Budgets replace ambition. Conservation replaces acquisition. Hearst Castle continues to operate as a site of spectacle. It generates revenue through admission, supports regional tourism, and stands as one of California's most visited historic landmarks. Its presence is economically useful, culturally recognizable, and carefully managed. Yet the hill no longer produces power, it commemorates it. The distinction is quiet but absolute. Chapter 2. Why this hill mattered. At its height, the hill did not merely host gatherings, it organized them. Hearst Castle functioned as a private court on the western edge of the continent, geographically distant from Washington and New York, yet deeply entangled with both. Its isolation was strategic. The remoteness of San Simeon required intention. One did not arrive casually. The journey itself signaled inclusion. The estate operated as an extension of the publishing empire controlled by William Randolph Hearst. Newspapers circulated daily across major American cities, shaping opinion at scale. Editorial positions could influence elections, frame wars, elevate reputations, or dismantle them. That influence did not remain confined to paper. It required physical space, somewhere to consolidate alliances, test loyalties, and cultivate proximity. The hill provided that space. Guests were not simply invited for leisure, they were assembled. Studio executives, senators, foreign envoys, financiers, writers, each arrived under the pretext of hospitality. Yet the architecture of the visit was deliberate. Seating arrangements at dinner were curated. Weekend schedules were orchestrated. Screenings in the private theater were followed by conversation. Informal exchanges carried the weight of negotiation. The estate's design reinforced hierarchy. The Casa Grande dominated the hilltop, visible from miles away. The guest houses, though lavish, remained subordinate in elevation and scale. Movement through the complex mirrored social structure. Ascent implied access. To be lodged closer to the main house signified favor. This was not accidental grandeur, it was spatial governance. The estate also mattered because it presented a distinct American variation of aristocracy. Europe possessed inherited courts, palaces formed over centuries. The United States did not. Yet on this hill, a comparable atmosphere was constructed through capital rather than lineage. Imported ceilings from Spanish monasteries and Italian villas were embedded into California concrete. Tapestries once woven for European nobility hung in rooms designed for Hollywood producers. The message was precise. Wealth could compress time. By assembling fragments of European prestige within a modern American framework, the Hill asserted that power in the 20th century was no longer territorial, it was financial and media-driven. Cultural authority could be curated, transported, and recontextualized. The estate's gatherings blurred boundaries between sectors. Politics intersected with entertainment. Journalism intersected with diplomacy. Film premieres were screened before newspaper endorsements were drafted. Editorial campaigns could be discussed between swims in the Roman pool and formal dinners beneath carved ceilings. In this way, the Hill functioned less as a retreat and more as a stabilizing chamber. Public narratives were influenced in private. Alliances were strengthened outside formal institutions. Decisions were not always made there, but they were shaped there. Crucially, the estate embodied confidence in permanence. The scale of construction and the accumulation of art suggested a system that anticipated longevity. To build at such magnitude implied belief in uninterrupted revenue streams and enduring relevance. The Hill projected stability even as the broader economy fluctuated. Its importance, therefore, was not aesthetic alone, it was infrastructural. The estate concentrated influence geographically and symbolically. It allowed a media empire to materialize itself in stone. In doing so, it transformed landscape into leverage.
Chapter 3: The Inheritance of Power. Long before the towers rose above the Pacific, the Hill belonged to a different system of wealth. The origins of Hearst Castle lie not in architecture, but in extraction. In the mid-19th century, the American West offered a particular promise. Land could be claimed, minerals unearthed, fortunes assembled with speed unknown to older societies. Among those who understood this transformation was George Hearst. George Hearst's wealth emerged from mining claims in Nevada, South Dakota, and California. Silver and gold financed the consolidation of land along the central coast of California, including the vast ranch at San Simeon. These holdings were not ornamental, they were agricultural, expansive, productive. The ranch functioned as an operational landscape. Cattle, crops, water rights, managed for yield rather than display. The land was capital, stabilized in soil. When George Hearst died, the estate and its assets passed to his widow, Phoebe Apperson Hearst, and eventually to their son, William Randolph Hearst. The inheritance was not simply financial, it was structural. It included land holdings large enough to anchor identity and a fortune substantial enough to expand beyond regional enterprise. William Randolph Hearst redirected that capital into newspapers. Beginning with the acquisition of the San Francisco Examiner, he built a publishing network that stretched across major American cities. The business model relied on circulation volume, advertising revenue, and a style of journalism that captured attention aggressively. The enterprise scaled quickly, newspapers multiplied, syndicates formed, influence accumulated. Yet the wealth remained fluid. Printing presses depreciated, political alliances shifted, public opinion was volatile. Unlike mineral deposits or ranch land, media power required constant maintenance. San Simeon represented something different. It was not a speculative asset, it was inherited ground. For Hearst, the ranch was the physical remainder of his father's generation, a reminder that beneath the machinery of newspapers lay something older and less exposed to market fluctuation. When construction began in 1919, it did not begin with a fully formed palace. It began with the intention to create a place of return. Hearst referred to the project as the ranch. The terminology preserved continuity with its agricultural past, even as the scale of ambition expanded. The decision to build on inherited land carried symbolic weight. Rather than establishing a new estate on the East Coast among established elites, Hearst chose the remote terrain his father had consolidated through mining profits. The site anchored the publishing empire to its original source of capital. The architect selected for the task, Julia Morgan, translated this ambition into structure. Trained at the École des Beaux-Arts, she possessed both technical discipline and aesthetic range. Her role is not to impose a singular European model, but to orchestrate accumulation. Towers inspired by Spanish cathedrals, cloisters recalling monastic complexes, facades assembled from imported fragments. Construction proceeded without definitive endpoint. Budgets expanded as needed. Rooms were redesigned after completion. Ceilings purchased abroad were shipped, cataloged, and fitted into evolving plans. The project operated less like a conventional build and more like a continuing assertion of capacity. The estate grew in phases, responding to desire rather than necessity. What emerged was not merely a residence, but an embodiment of inherited authority seeking architectural permanence. Mining wealth had secured land, publishing wealth amplified influence. On this hill, those layers converged. The castle was not conceived as indulgence alone. It was a consolidation of capital, lineage, and ambition into a single, immovable form. Chapter 4. The Machinery of Extravagance. By the mid-1920s, the hill had ceased to be a construction project and become a system. Its growth required coordination at a scale uncommon for a private residence. Plans were drawn and redrawn in continuous correspondence between San Simeon and the office of Julia Morgan in San Francisco. Sketches traveled by post. Telephones carried revisions. Decisions were rarely final. Walls shifted. Towers rose incrementally. Courtyards expanded to accommodate newly acquired architectural fragments. The estate did not follow a fixed blueprint. It responded to acquisition. Agents operating in Europe purchased ceilings from Spanish monasteries, choir stalls from Italian churches, tapestries from dismantled estates. These fragments were cataloged, crated, and shipped across the Atlantic. Upon arrival, they entered storage warehouses in New York and California, awaiting integration. The hill functioned as a receiving chamber for dislocated history. Installation required engineering. Medieval beams were reinforced with steel supports. Decorative panels were adapted to modern load-bearing walls. Electric wiring was concealed behind carved wood, imported centuries earlier. The past was made structurally compliant with the 20th century. This process demanded constant labor. Art handlers, carpenters, masons, and plasterers worked in rotation. Skilled European craftsmen were sometimes brought in to oversee delicate assembly. Deliveries moved up the winding road daily. Stone, cement, tile, livestock feed, linens, wine. The hill consumed resources with regularity. Below the castle, the ranch operated as infrastructure. Thousands of acres supported cattle herds, dairy production, and agricultural cultivation. Water systems were expanded to sustain both livestock and ornamental gardens. Reservoirs were engineered to secure supply during dry seasons. The Neptune pool and Roman pool were not decorative accidents. They depended on hydraulic planning and ongoing maintenance. Staff hierarchies mirrored the complexity of the estate. A superintendent oversaw daily operations. Groundskeepers maintained terraced gardens. A chief engineer supervised mechanical systems. Domestic staff managed guest quarters, dining service, and inventory. The kitchen operated with near-hotel precision, prepared to accommodate fluctuating numbers of visitors without public notice. Schedules were precise. Construction crews worked in phases to avoid disturbing guests. Materials were stockpiled in anticipation of future expansion. Accounts were tracked through offices connected to the publishing headquarters in New York. The estate did not operate independently of the media empire. It was financed through it. Revenue from newspapers underwrote marble shipments and labor payrolls. Advertising income translated into imported fountains. Circulation growth enabled additional guest houses. The relationship was direct. The more expansive the publishing network, the more ambitious the Hill could become. At times, costs exceeded projections, yet expenditure did not trigger retreat. Instead, the solution was scale. Expand circulation, acquire additional papers, leverage political alliances to maintain advertising strength. The estate's appetite was answered by the empire's reach. Hearst Castle functioned as a vertically integrated organism. Ranch operations supported provisioning. Media revenue financed acquisition. Architectural ambition absorbed both. No single component stood alone. The machinery was not ornamental. It was continuous.
Chapter 5. The Court at San Simeon. At its height, the Hill developed a rhythm distinct from construction and finance. It became social infrastructure. Weekends followed a pattern. Guests arrived by private train to San Luis Obispo, where cars conveyed them north along the coast. The ascent to the estate was deliberate, the road winding upward in stages, revealing glimpses of towers before granting full view. Arrival was orchestrated. Luggage disappeared efficiently. Staff absorbed the logistics. What remained visible was ease. Inside the Casa Grande, evenings unfolded beneath carved ceilings imported from Spain and Italy. Candles in concealed electric lighting softened stone. Seating at dinner was not incidental. Placement reflected alliances, sensitivities, ambitions. Conversations that began with cinema or travel often drifted toward legislation, editorial positions, or studio contracts. The estate did not resemble Washington or New York. It offered distance from scrutiny. That distance altered tone. Political figures could speak without stenographers. Film executives could negotiate without press. Foreign visitors encountered a version of American authority detached from official office, yet saturated with influence. Among the frequent guests were leading figures from the Hollywood studios, including Louis B. Mayer, whose industry depended in part on favorable media coverage. Screenings were held in the estate's private theater. Films were evaluated not only for artistic merit, but for public reception. Editorial support from the Hearst newspapers could amplify a premiere. Criticism could complicate it. Political operatives also moved through these rooms. Hearst's newspapers endorsed candidates, framed referenda, and campaigned for policies. Discussions at San Simeon did not replace formal processes, but they informed them.
The proximity between publisher and politician compressed the distance between opinion and power. The atmosphere combined ceremony and informality. Breakfast might be taken outdoors overlooking the Pacific. Afternoon swims in the Neptune pool created temporary equality among guests, otherwise separated by rank. Yet the structure of invitation remained clear. Entry to the hill was selective. Duration of stay reflected status. The estate's architecture reinforced this courtly atmosphere. Towers suggested European precedent, but the court they sheltered was distinctly American, formed not by hereditary nobility, but by industrial and media ascendancy. The hierarchy was financial, reputational, and strategic. Cultural production intersected with governance here. Articles drafted in metropolitan offices reverberated through conversations held beside tiled fountains. Contracts negotiated in Los Angeles were affirmed during quiet walks along terraces. Influence was exercised without official title. The Hill absorbed these interactions and translated them into continuity. Its scale implied durability. Its gatherings signaled relevance. The court at San Simeon functioned not as spectacle alone, but as calibration, a place where disparate centers of power aligned. Chapter 6: Debt, Scale, and Structural Strain. The Hill was designed to expand. It was not designed to contract. By the early 1930s, the system that sustained Hearst Castle began to experience pressures beyond architectural ambition. The publishing empire that financed the estate had grown aggressively for decades. Newspapers were acquired in rapid succession. New markets were entered with confidence that circulation would follow. Expansion had been the solution to cost. Scale was treated as insulation. The economic downturn of the Great Depression altered that equation. Advertising revenue declined sharply across the industry. Circulation numbers fluctuated. Credit, once extended freely to powerful publishers, tightened. The financial architecture supporting the Hearst organization, loans, bonds, interlocking subsidiaries, became exposed to scrutiny. The estate at San Simeon remained physically unchanged. Construction continued in phases. Acquisitions were still made. Yet beneath this continuity, liquidity grew strained. The publishing network required constant capital to operate. Printing plants, payrolls, distribution systems in multiple cities. Fixed costs did not diminish simply because revenue slowed. Debt accumulated as obligations were refinanced rather than reduced. What had once been a strategy of growth now required careful negotiation with creditors. The Hill felt this indirectly but unmistakably. Budgets that had once expanded without hesitation began to require calculation. Shipments of art slowed. Certain projects were deferred. While no public acknowledgement of difficulty occurred within the estate's social sphere, the financial system supporting its existence had entered a different phase. The castle's scale intensified the strain. It was not a seasonal residence that could be shuttered with minimal expense. Mechanical systems required maintenance regardless of guest presence. Pools demanded cleaning. Staff salaries remained fixed. The ranch infrastructure below the hill, water systems, livestock operations, road maintenance, generated ongoing costs independent of revenue fluctuations. Unlike a corporate office that could reduce workforce quickly, the estate functioned through specialized labor. Skilled craftsmen, engineers, and domestic staff formed a network of knowledge specific to the site. To dismantle that network risked operational instability, yet to maintain it required steady funding. At the center of this tension stood William Randolph Hearst. His personal authority had long unified the system. Editorial decisions, acquisitions, construction directives, each flowed through his oversight. As long as revenue matched ambition, this centralization enabled swift action. Under financial pressure, centralization magnified risk. Creditors sought transparency. Asset valuations were reassessed. The distinction between personal holdings and corporate liabilities blurred. The estate, though legally distinct in certain respects, was symbolically inseparable from the empire's public profile. Its visible opulence contrasted sharply with an economy in contraction. The very features that had signaled dominance, multiple guest houses, imported antiquities, expansive terraces, now represented fixed obligations in a volatile market. Expansion no longer guaranteed stability, it amplified exposure. The system had been built for ascent. It now had to confront gravity.
Chapter 7. Extraction replaces stewardship. When expansion ceased to be sustainable, the system did not collapse, it recalibrated. By the mid-1930s, financial restructuring within the Hearst organization had shifted authority from personal command to negotiated oversight. Creditors imposed conditions. Assets were reviewed with new scrutiny. The empire that had once expanded through acquisition now faced consolidation. San Simeon entered a different phase. Construction slowed to a near standstill. Rooms that had been designed but not completed remained unfinished. Architectural drawings accumulated without execution. The hill, long accustomed to constant addition, adjusted to stillness. This change was not framed as retreat. Publicly, the estate continued to function as a site of hospitality. Guests still arrived. Dinners were held. Yet internally, capital allocation followed a revised logic. Expenditure required justification. Repairs replaced new commissions. Maintenance displaced ambition. The publishing empire itself contracted. Certain newspapers were sold. Holdings were reorganized under corporate structures designed to stabilize debt. Control became distributed among trustees and financial managers rather than resting solely with William Randolph Hearst. The system that had once answered to a singular vision now operated through committees and fiscal restraint. San Simeon, inseparable from the identity of that vision, was evaluated accordingly. Operating costs were measured against revenue streams. The ranch below the hill, once an expansive agricultural enterprise, began to shed acreage. Parcels were subdivided or leased. Livestock operations diminished. What had functioned as integrated infrastructure was gradually reduced to manageable scale. Inside the estate, collections were reassessed. Art that had been acquired in abundance represented liquidity. Select pieces were quietly sold through intermediaries to relieve financial pressure. The hill no longer absorbed European fragments with confidence. It released them. Staff structures also shifted. Long-serving employees faced reassignment or dismissal as payroll tightened. Departments were consolidated. Specialized craftsmen were retained only when necessary. Knowledge that had once circulated through daily construction activity became dormant. The change was subtle but structural. The estate's relationship to money reversed. During expansion, surplus revenue had sought embodiment in stone and marble. Now the estate itself became a cost center, requiring containment. Stewardship altered in tone. Rather than asking what could be added, management asked what must be preserved. Mechanical systems were maintained to prevent deterioration.
not to support further growth. Gardens were trimmed to manageable scope. Water features operated within controlled parameters. The hill remained physically intact, but its metabolism slowed. Extraction did not occur through dramatic liquidation. It unfolded incrementally. A sale here, a reduced payroll there, postponed maintenance elsewhere. The system adapted to survival. The estate had once expressed confidence in perpetual ascent. It now expressed endurance under constraint.
Chapter 9. What survives on the hill? In its current condition, the hill appears stable. Stone has been reinforced against seismic risk. Roof lines are inspected routinely. Moisture is measured within walls that once absorbed coastal air without instrumentation. The pools are monitored for structural integrity as much as aesthetic clarity. Preservation science now underwrites endurance. Visitors move through the estate in regulated intervals. They encounter curated rooms in which furniture remains positioned according to archival photographs. Guides speak of acquisition, architecture, and celebrity. The narrative is structured, documented, and repeatable. The estate presents itself as coherent history. What survives most visibly is form. The Casa Grande still commands the summit. The twin bell towers frame the horizon. Cloisters remain proportioned to suggest European precedent transplanted to Californian terrain. The Neptune pool reflects the sky with composed symmetry. The Roman pool retains its tiled interior, luminous and controlled. The buildings endure because they are maintained. Less visible is what no longer circulates through these corridors. The publishing enterprise founded by the Hearst family continues in corporate form as the Hearst Corporation. It operates magazines, television stations, digital platforms. Its governance structure is formalized, diversified, and professionally managed. The scale of influence persists, though distributed across modern media systems rather than concentrated in daily newspapers alone. Yet that corporate entity no longer converges upon this hill. There is no structural necessity linking editorial strategy in Manhattan to dinner service in San Simeon. No contractual obligation requires political candidates to ascend the terraces for endorsement. No studio executive depends on proximity to secure favorable headlines over breakfast. The feedback loop that once connected architecture to influence has been severed. The estate survives as an artifact of integration, not as its active component. The ranch lands surrounding the hill have also changed in character. Portions remain preserved through conservation agreements. Other tracts are no longer managed as the expansive agricultural enterprise they once constituted. The logistical network that fed and sustained the estate as a semi-autonomous domain has contracted into fragments. What remains intact is surface continuity. What has dissolved is systemic interdependence. The hill today does not generate decisions, it interprets them. It does not cultivate alliances, it contextualizes them. Its authority is educational rather than operational. This transformation has produced a peculiar condition. The estate appears complete. The ceilings are installed, the courtyards are finished, the guest houses are furnished, yet the animating force that justified such scale, the confidence that capital, media, and personal command would align indefinitely, has receded into history. Hearst Castle stands as architecture preserved beyond the life of the system that created it. Its stones endure, its mechanisms have been dismantled.